After her mom, a secret trillionaire no one ever knew existed, died, the world thought the grieving daughter had lost everything. But on the very day she stood heavily pregnant at her baby shower, surrounded by balloons and smiles that didn't reach their eyes, her husband chose that moment to serve her divorce papers, believing he was finally free of a useless wife. What he didn't know, what his entire family didn't know, was that the woman he was humiliating had just inherited the trillion-dollar company they had worked for their entire lives. A company secretly built by her mother, hidden behind false names, shellboards, and silence. As his mistress mocked her, laughing as the papers hit her trembling hands, the room felt safe. For them. But the past was already waking up. Because years earlier, while they looked down on her, her mother had been watching, planning, preparing. And what this pregnant wife did next wouldn't just end a marriage. It would leave her husband, his mistress, and his entire family bankrupt and homeless. Please, not here. Not in front of everyone. Those were the desperate words Emma Hartwell whispered to her husband as he slapped divorce papers onto the gift table at her own baby shower, right between the diaper cake and the pastel balloons that spelled "It's a girl." But she couldn't process what was happening when barely 3 weeks after her mother, Catherine, died, 3 weeks after she'd laid to rest the woman who'd raised her alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, her husband David was standing in front of 50 shocked guests announcing he was leaving her for his mistress, the same woman who'd refused to attend Catherine's funeral because dead people give me bad vibes. Emma stood there 7 months pregnant with twins who would never meet their grandmother, clutching the simple pearl necklace her mother had worn every single day, watching through tears as David's mistress Brianna walked through the baby shower door wearing a smirk that said she'd already won, while Emma's mother's ashes were still sitting in an urn on her mantle because she hadn't found the strength to scatter them yet. But what crushed Emma's soul into dust so fine she thought she might disappear wasn't just her husband serving her divorce papers at her baby shower 3 weeks after burying her mom, or watching 50 guests whisper and pull out their phones to record her humiliation, or even seeing Brianna mouth pathetic as Emma's hands trembled over the legal documents that would make her a single mother. It was the locked briefcase sitting untouched in her closet, the one that had arrived from her mother's attorney the morning after Catherine's death, the briefcase her mother's lawyer had handed her, with shaking hands and tears streaming down his weathered face, saying words that made no sense. "Emma, your mother made me promise to tell you this myself. You are not who you think you are not where you think you are, and you are not what you think you are. Everything changes now." What David didn't know as he grabbed Brianna's hand and announced they were leaving this depressing party to celebrate their future together, what Brianna didn't know as she laughed and said, "Enjoy your charity life, Emma," loud enough for everyone to hear, was that Emma's mother, the quiet woman who'd worked as a consultant and drove a 15-year-old Honda, who'd clipped coupons every Sunday so Emma could have school supplies, who'd worn the same winter coat for 20 years so Emma could go to college, wasn't just a consultant. She was the secret founder and sole owner of Hartwell Global Industries, a trillion-dollar empire that manufactured everything from the phones in their pockets to the cars they drove, the company where David's entire family had worked for decades, the corporation that employed David's father as a regional manager, his mother as a senior accountant, his brother as a department head, and David himself as a mid-level analyst who'd spent 12 years trying to climb a corporate ladder he didn't know his wife's family owned. And in exactly 6 hours and 12 minutes, when Emma's trembling fingers finally opened that briefcase to discover she'd inherited a trillion-dollar company, 12,000 employees, and the power to decide the professional fate of every single person who'd ever heard her, Brianna would collapse in the parking lot of David's parents' house, gasping between sobs of pure terror. "David, your wife owns your entire family's jobs. She owns your career. She owns everything. You divorced a trillionaire for me. What have you done? What have you done to all of us?" But the real question wasn't what David had done. It was what Emma would do when she discovered that her husband's entire family had worked for her mother's company for years, when she realized that one signature could end every career and destroy every life that had just destroyed hers. When she learned that the gentle woman who'd raised her alone had secretly been one of the most powerful people in America, And when she finally understood why her mother's last words, whispered in that hospital room 3 weeks ago, had been, "Baby girl, you're about to inherit more than money. You're about to inherit a choice. Choose wisely because power reveals character. It doesn't create it." So what would Emma choose when the mistress who'd mocked her at her own baby shower came crawling back? What would she do when the husband who'd publicly humiliated her while she was pregnant and grieving begged for mercy? And what would happen when she discovered the real reason her mother had kept her identity secret for 32 years? A reason so shocking, so unbelievable, it would change everything Emma thought she knew about her life, her past, and the true cost of the empire she'd just inherited. The baby shower decorations were still swaying from the slam of the door when Emma Hartwell realized her entire life had just shattered in front of 50 witnesses with smartphones. But the pink and yellow streamers mocking her from the ceiling weren't what made her knees buckle. It was the weight of 3 weeks of grief, 7 months of pregnancy, and the divorce papers now scattered across a table that should have held joy instead of destruction. Her best friend Lauren was at her side within seconds, arms wrapping around Emma's shaking shoulders, even as their other guests froze in a tableau of shock and secondhand embarrassment. But Emma barely registered the comfort because her mind had catapulted backward to 3 weeks ago, to her mother's hospital room, to Catherine Hartwell's final moments on Earth. The memory crashed through Emma's consciousness with brutal clarity. Her mother had looked so small in that hospital bed, so unlike the woman who'd always seemed larger than life despite her quiet demeanor and modest lifestyle. But Catherine's eyes had been bright with something Emma couldn't name. Urgency mixed with secrets, mixed with a love so fierce it felt like protection and warning combined. "Emma, baby girl," Catherine had whispered, her voice already fading like a radio signal losing reception. "The briefcase will arrive tomorrow morning, but don't open it yet. Not until you absolutely have to. Not until you're ready to see everything differently." Emma had gripped her mother's hand tighter, tears streaming down her face, not understanding why they were talking about briefcases when they should have been talking about miracles and fighting and refusing to let go. But Catherine had continued, each word costing her something precious. "I lived my whole life as someone small so you could grow up normal, so you could learn that character matters more than credentials, that kindness is worth more than corporations, that love is the only currency that counts in the end." Catherine's breathing had grown more labored with each syllable. "But now you need to know the truth, and you need to remember who you are when the world tries to tell you who you should be." Those had been her mother's last coherent sentences before the monitors started screaming, and the medical team rushed in, and Emma's world ended in a flurry of failed CPR and flatlines, and the horrible, final silence that meant her mother was gone forever. But now, standing in the wreckage of her baby shower 3 weeks later, Emma's mind couldn't stop replaying those cryptic words, even as Lauren guided her to a chair, and someone else, maybe her cousin Rachel, started ushering shocked guests toward the door with whispered apologies and awkward promises that Emma would be fine. She wasn't fine, though, not by any definition of the word. Her husband of 6 years had just served her divorce papers at her own baby shower, had brought his mistress to the event like some kind of twisted trophy, had announced in front of everyone she knew that he was done pretending and ready to start his real life with Brianna, the 26-year-old paralegal from his office building who wore designer clothes Emma could never afford and drove a car that cost more than Emma's annual salary as a middle school art teacher. The worst part, or maybe just another layer of the worst part, was that David's entire family had been at the shower too, and not one of them had tried to stop him. His mother, Patricia, had actually nodded in approval when David made his announcement, as if Emma's public humiliation was justice served. His father, Gregory, had smirked. His brother, Colin, had filmed the whole thing on his phone, probably already planning where to post it for maximum viral impact and humiliation. But Emma's hands were shaking too hard to process any of that because they kept reaching for the pearl necklace at her throat. The simple strand her mother had worn every single day for as long as Emma could remember, the necklace that was worth maybe $200 at most, the jewelry that represented everything Catherine had been, understated, elegant, genuine, and completely unconcerned with impressing anyone. "I need everyone to leave," Emma finally managed to say, her voice coming out stronger than she felt. "Please, I need to be alone." Lauren started to protest, but Emma cut her off with a look that communicated everything she couldn't say out loud, that she was about to fall apart completely, that she needed to grieve in private, that having witnesses to her breakdown would destroy whatever dignity she had left. The guests filed out in uncomfortable silence, leaving behind half-eaten cake and unopened presents in an atmosphere so thick with pity that Emma thought she might suffocate. But within 15 minutes, the event space was empty except for the decorations nobody had bothered to take down, and the divorce papers still spread across the gift table like evidence of a crime. Emma sat alone in the devastation and let herself cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone trying to maintain composure, but the ugly, gut-wrenching sobs of someone whose life had been demolished twice in 3 weeks. She cried for her mother, who died too young at 57 from a cancer that had been discovered too late. She cried for her marriage that had apparently been a lie for longer than she'd realized. She cried for her unborn twins, who would enter a broken world without a father or a grandmother to love them. But mostly she cried because she was scared, terrified of single motherhood and poverty, and raising 2 babies alone on a teacher's salary, terrified that David was right when he'd whispered cruel things over the past few months about her being boring and ordinary and exactly like her nobody mother. The thought of her mother jolted Emma back to awareness, and suddenly she was thinking about that briefcase again, the one that had been sitting untouched in her closet for 3 weeks because she hadn't been able to face it. Her mother's attorney, a distinguished man in his 70s named Robert Chen, had delivered it personally the morning after Catherine's death, had insisted on handing it to Emma himself despite his obvious grief. "Your mother was very specific about this," Robert had said, his voice thick with emotion. "She made me promise that I would tell you something before you open this briefcase, something that needs to be said with another human present as witness to the truth." Emma had been too numb with grief to fully process his words, but she remembered them now with perfect clarity. "Emma, your mother spent 32 years building a life of deliberate simplicity so you could grow up understanding that worth isn't measured in wealth, that power is meaningless without purpose, that the size of your bank account says nothing about the size of your heart. But now it's time for you to know the truth about Catherine Hartwell. And the truth is this: your mother wasn't poor. She was never poor. She was one of the richest people in America, and she chose to live small so you could grow up big." The words hadn't made sense then, and they didn't make complete sense now, but Emma found herself standing up and walking to her car in a daze. She drove home on autopilot, her mind spinning through memories of her childhood, the small apartment, the clipped coupons, the secondhand clothes, the careful budgeting that had seemed like necessity but now felt like something else entirely. Her apartment, the same modest 2-bedroom where she'd grown up and where her mother had lived until the cancer made hospitals necessary, felt different when Emma walked through the door. Everything looked the same: the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the bookshelf full of library sale finds. But something fundamental had shifted, like looking at an optical illusion and suddenly seeing the hidden image that had been there all along. The briefcase was in her bedroom closet, exactly where she'd left it 3 weeks ago. Emma pulled it out with shaking hands, noting details she'd been too grief-stricken to see before. The expensive leather, the platinum locks, the weight that suggested importance beyond measure. There was a note taped to the top in her mother's handwriting. Emma's vision blurred with fresh tears as she recognized the familiar script. "My darling Emma, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll be facing the biggest decision of your life. But before you open this briefcase, I need you to remember 3 things. First, you are exactly who I raised you to be, and that person is magnificent. Second, money will reveal everyone's true character, including your own, so pay attention to what people do when they learn the truth. Third, Hartwell Global Industries isn't just a company. It's a responsibility, a legacy, and a choice. Choose wisely, baby girl. Choose with the heart I know you have. I love you forever. Mom. Hartwell Global Industries." The name triggered something in Emma's memory. She'd heard it before, seen it before, but where? And then it hit her with the force of a freight train. David worked for Hartwell Global Industries. His entire family worked for Hartwell Global Industries. It was the company his father was always complaining about at family dinners, the corporation his mother discussed with pride at holiday gatherings, the business that employed hundreds of the people in their mid-sized Ohio city. But that couldn't be right, could it? Her mother couldn't have had any connection to the massive corporation that dominated their town's economy. Catherine Hartwell had been a quiet consultant who'd worked from home, a single mother who'd lived simply and died with what Emma had assumed was a modest life insurance policy and maybe some retirement savings. With trembling fingers, Emma unlocked the briefcase using the combination her mother had written in the note, her birthday. The case opened with a soft click that sounded like a door opening to another dimension. Inside was a single folder, deceptively thin for something that was about to change everything. Emma opened it and started reading. The first document was a corporate ownership certificate. Hartwell Global Industries, Incor's sole owner and founder, Catherine Marie Hartwell. Current company valuation, $1.2 trillion. Primary shareholder and inheritor, Emma Rose Hartwell. Emma's vision went gray at the edges, and she had to sit down on her bed before she fell down. Trillion. Trillion with a T. That wasn't possible. That couldn't be real. But the documents kept coming, each one more impossible than the last. There was a letter from the company's board of directors expressing their condolences on Catherine's death and their eagerness to meet with Emma at her earliest convenience. There were bank statements showing accounts with balances that hurt Emma's eyes to look at. There were property deeds to homes in 7 countries. There were investment portfolios that read like fairy tales written in numbers. But the document that made Emma's breath stop completely was a personnel file, specifically, a complete employment record of the Hartwell family currently employed by Hartwell Global Industries. Gregory Hartwell, regional manager, employed since 1998, annual salary $185,000. Patricia Hartwell, senior accountant, employed since 2002, annual salary $142,000. Colin Hartwell, department head of marketing, employed since 2015, annual salary $165,000. David Hartwell, market research analyst, employed since 2013, annual salary $98,000. And there, at the bottom of the page, a handwritten note from her mother dated just 2 weeks before her death. Emma, I never told you, but David has been trying to get promoted for years. He thinks he's being held back by politics and favoritism. The truth is simpler. I wouldn't let him advance because I could see what he was. Even if you couldn't yet, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I let you marry him, but I knew you needed to learn some lessons on your own, even painful ones. Use this information however you think is right. Just remember, revenge is easy, but grace is powerful. Choose your power carefully. Mom. Emma read the note 3 times, each reading bringing new understanding and new horror. Her mother had known. Catherine had known about David's character flaws, had known he was unworthy, had actively prevented his career advancement while Emma was married to him, which meant her mother had been watching Emma's life from a position of extraordinary power while pretending to be ordinary, had been protecting Emma in ways she'd never known, had been preparing for this moment when Emma would inherit not just money but choices. The grief that crashed through Emma now was different from before, sharper, more complex, threaded with anger and gratitude and confusion. Why hadn't her mother told her? Why had Catherine let Emma struggle through years of tight budgets and financial stress when she'd been secretly wealthy beyond imagination? Why had she watched Emma marry David without warning her about what kind of man he really was? But even as Emma asked these questions, she knew the answers from her mother's notes and words. Catherine had wanted Emma to develop character independent of wealth, to become someone who valued people for their humanity rather than their bank accounts, to learn lessons about love and loyalty and integrity that only came from experiencing life without the cushion of unlimited money. It was a gift, Emma realized with sudden clarity. A painful, complicated, frustrating gift, but a gift nonetheless. Her phone buzzed with a text message, jarring her back to the present moment. It was from David. I'm coming by tomorrow to get my stuff. Have it ready. And tell your lawyer I want this divorce fast and clean. You'll get nothing but child support. You're lucky you're even getting that." Emma stared at the message for a long moment, and then, surprising herself, she laughed. It started as a small sound but grew into something bigger, almost hysterical, the laughter of someone who just discovered that the universe has a vicious sense of humor. David thought she had nothing. He thought he was leaving her destitute. He thought he'd won by abandoning his pregnant wife for a younger woman with better clothes and a nicer car. But what David didn't know, what Brianna didn't know, what none of the Hartwells knew, was that Emma now owned their entire professional lives. One signature on one document, and she could fire them all. She could destroy their careers, demolish their financial stability, render them as powerless as they'd tried to make her feel. The knowledge sat in her chest like a bomb waiting to detonate, and Emma knew with absolute certainty that this was the test her mother had talked about. What would she do with this power? What did her character look like when she had the ability to destroy the people who destroyed her? But Emma didn't make any decisions that night. Instead, she called Robert Chen, the attorney whose number was in the briefcase, and asked if he could come over. He arrived within 45 minutes, moving with impressive speed for a man in his 70s, and his face when he saw Emma's tears told her he understood exactly what she was feeling. "Your mother anticipated this would be overwhelming," Robert said gently, settling into the worn armchair that had been Catherine's favorite spot. "She asked me to be available to you at any hour, any day, for exactly this reason." "Tell me the truth," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Tell me everything about who my mother really was." And Robert did. He talked for 3 hours, painting a picture of Catherine Hartwell that was simultaneously shocking and completely consistent with the woman Emma had known. Catherine had founded Hartwell Global Industries in her mid-20s with a revolutionary manufacturing process she developed in her college dorm room. The company had exploded into success faster than anyone could have predicted, making Catherine a billionaire before she turned 30. But then she'd gotten pregnant, an unplanned pregnancy from a relationship that had ended badly, and she'd made a choice. "Your mother believed that extreme wealth corrupted almost everyone it touched," Robert explained. "She'd seen it happen to friends and family members, watched money transform good people into monsters. So when you were born, she made a radical decision. She would step back from public leadership of the company, install trusted executives to run daily operations, and raise you in a completely normal, middle-class environment." Emma listened in stunned silence as Robert described how her mother had lived on a deliberately modest budget, had worked as a genuine consultant for the company she owned, consulting under a different last name so no one would make the connection, and had poured her billions into trusts and investments and philanthropic foundations that operated anonymously. "She wanted you to develop your own identity separate from wealth," Robert continued. "She wanted you to learn the value of $1 by not having $1 million of them. She wanted you to choose friends and partners based on who they were rather than what they wanted from you. And most importantly, she wanted you to inherit her company and her fortune with a character strong enough to handle it with wisdom instead of ego." "But why now?" Emma asked. "Why reveal everything after she's gone instead of preparing me while she was alive?" Robert smiled sadly. "She tried in her own way. All those lessons about kindness, all those conversations about character mattering more than status, all those moments when she taught you to see people's true nature instead of their surface presentation. That was her preparing you. She believed you'd be ready when the moment came, and that the shock of discovering the truth after her death would make you take the responsibility seriously rather than taking it for granted." Emma thought about this for a long moment, turning the logic over in her mind. It made a painful kind of sense, but it also felt cruel to die and leave Emma alone to navigate this impossible situation without guidance. "What would she want me to do?" Emma finally asked. "About David, about his family, about everything." Robert's expression grew thoughtful. "Catherine never told me what to tell you because she trusted you to make your own decisions. But I can tell you what she believed, that revenge might feel good in the moment, but regret lasts forever, that true power is measured by restraint rather than retaliation, and that the best way to prove you're better than someone is to actually be better than them." Emma nodded slowly, absorbing this wisdom even as her emotions churned between fury and grief and something that might have been the beginning of clarity. The next morning, Emma woke up with a plan. It wasn't a plan for revenge. Not exactly. It was a plan for truth, for revelation, for giving people exactly what they'd been asking for, while discovering what they were really made of. She called Robert and asked him to arrange an emergency board meeting of Hartwell Global Industries for that afternoon. Then she texted David back, "Come get your stuff whenever you want. I'm not going to fight you on anything. You win." David's response came almost immediately. "Damn right I do. See you at 2." At 1 o'clock, Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror, looking at herself with new eyes. She was still 7 months pregnant with twins, still puffy from crying, still wearing the pearl necklace that had been her mother's signature piece. But something fundamental had changed in her expression. A steel that hadn't been there before, a strength that came from understanding exactly who she was and what she was capable of. She didn't change out of her modest maternity dress or style her hair any differently than usual. She wanted David to see her exactly as he'd always seen her, ordinary, unremarkable, easy to leave. That contrast would make what came next even more powerful. When David arrived at 2 o'clock with Colin in tow, apparently he needed his brother as backup for the simple task of collecting his belongings. Emma greeted them with quiet courtesy. She'd packed everything of David's into boxes, had even included some things she probably should have kept just to make the process easier. "Wow, you actually did something right for once," David said with a sneer, surveying the boxes. "I was expecting you to be difficult." Emma said nothing, just watched as the brothers loaded boxes into David's car. Colin was filming again, probably for Brianna's entertainment, Emma realized with disgust, and narrating the scene like it was some kind of victory documentary. "And here we have Emma, the art teacher, in her natural habitat," Colin said mockingly into his phone camera. "Alone, broke, and about to be a welfare mom. Meanwhile, my brother is upgrading to a woman who actually matters." Emma felt the anger rise in her throat like bile, but she swallowed it down and remembered her mother's words about character. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. When the last box was loaded, David turned to Emma with something that might have been regret crossing his face for just a second. But then it hardened into resolve, and he said the words that would echo in Emma's mind for years to come. "You know what your problem is, Emma? You're exactly like your mother was. Small. Small life. Small dreams. Small everything. I married you thinking you'd grow into something more, but you never did. Brianna is what I should have had from the beginning." He got in his car and drove away without looking back, and Emma stood in the doorway of her mother's apartment, feeling a curious sense of calm settle over her. Small. That's what he thought. That's what he'd always thought. He had no idea what was coming. At 4 o'clock, Emma walked into the headquarters of Hartwell Global Industries for the first time in her life. The building was massive, glass and steel and modern architecture that screamed money and power. The receptionist looked confused when Emma gave her name, but a call from Robert Chen had her being escorted to the top floor within minutes. The boardroom held 12 people when Emma entered. Robert Chen, a group of executives she didn't recognize, and, to her complete shock, David's entire family. Gregory, Patricia, and Colin Hartwell sat at one end of the conference table looking smug and comfortable, apparently included in what they thought was a routine corporate meeting. Emma paused in the doorway, and for just a moment, she saw recognition flicker across Patricia's face. Not recognition of Emma's importance, but recognition that this was David's soon-to-be ex-wife, the nobody who'd just been divorced at her own baby shower. "What is she doing here?" Patricia asked Robert with obvious disdain. "This is a closed corporate meeting." Robert stood up with the formal bearing of someone about to change the entire world. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Emma Rose Hartwell, daughter of our late founder, Catherine Hartwell, and as of 3 weeks ago, the sole owner and majority shareholder of Hartwell Global Industries. Emma now owns 100% of this company, which makes her your employer, your boss, and the person who will determine the future direction of every division, every department, and every employee position in this organization." The silence that followed was so complete that Emma could hear her own heartbeat. She watched as understanding bloomed across the faces in front of her. Watched Gregory's face drain of color, Watched Patricia's mouth fall open in horror. Watched Colin's phone slip from his suddenly nerveless fingers. "That's impossible," Gregory finally managed to say. "Catherine Hartwell was a janitor or something. David said Emma's mother was nobody." "David was wrong," Emma said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Her voice was steady despite the fear screaming through her nervous system. "My mother was the founder and owner of this company. She built it from nothing into the trillion-dollar corporation it is today. And now I own every bit of it, including your jobs, your salaries, your benefits, and your futures." Patricia made a sound like a wounded animal. "Oh, God. Oh, God. David doesn't know. David just divorced you. David just—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the magnitude of the disaster they were all facing. Emma turned to Robert. "I'd like personnel files for Gregory, Patricia, and Colin Hartwell, please. I want to review their performance records, their salaries, and their employment history before I make any decisions about their continued employment." "You can't fire us," Colin shouted, jumping to his feet. "We have contracts. We have rights." "You have employment at will," Robert said calmly, "which means Ms. Hartwell can terminate your positions at any time for any reason or no reason at all, as long as it's not discriminatory. Being related to someone who publicly humiliated the owner of the company at her baby shower is not a protected class." Emma watched them squirm and felt the power of her position like electricity in her veins. This was the moment she could destroy them all, could render them as powerless and humiliated as they'd made her feel. One word from her, and they'd lose everything. But then she thought about her mother, about Catherine's deliberate choices and careful lessons, about the test of character that Emma was currently taking. "I'm not going to fire you," Emma said slowly, watching hope bloom on their faces. "Not today, anyway. But I am going to do something else." She turned to the executives she didn't know. "I want every employee in this company to understand that Emma Hartwell is now in charge. I want a company-wide meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. And I want David Hartwell added to the invite list with a note that attendance is mandatory for all employees." Gregory found his voice, though it came out strangled. "What are you going to do?" Emma smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. "I'm going to give David exactly what he wanted, the chance to see who's small and who isn't. And then I'm going to make a decision about this company's future, about your future, and about what kind of leader I'm going to be. My mother taught me that character is revealed by power. So let's find out what my character looks like." She left the boardroom in silence, walked out of the building with her head high, and drove home feeling like she was piloting a vehicle through a dream. Everything felt surreal. The power, the money, the choices spreading before her like roads branching in 1,000 directions. That night, Emma received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, Brianna's voice came through the line, shaking with barely suppressed panic. "Is it true?" Brianna asked without preamble. "David's mom called him screaming about you owning the company. Is it true?" "Yes," Emma said simply. There was a long pause, and then Brianna's voice came again, smaller this time. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided yet," Emma answered honestly. "But you should probably come to the company meeting tomorrow morning. You'll want to hear what I have to say." She hung up before Brianna could respond, and then she sat in her mother's apartment, her apartment now, and thought about choices and consequences and character. The company-wide meeting the next morning was held in the largest conference hall Hartwell Global Industries owned, with satellite feeds to regional offices across the country. Emma stood backstage, 7 months pregnant and wearing her mother's pearl necklace, watching through a gap in the curtain as 12,000 employees filled the space and tuned in remotely. She could see David in the third row, looking confused and angry, with Brianna beside him looking terrified. She could see Gregory, Patricia, and Colin clustered together near the back, their faces masks of anxiety. She could see hundreds of other employees who had no idea their world was about to shift on its axis. Robert Chen took the stage first, introducing Emma as the new owner and CEO of Hartwell Global Industries. The applause was confused, polite, uncertain. These people had no context for who she was or what she meant to their futures. And then Emma walked onto the stage and the room fell silent. She stood at the podium for a long moment, looking out at the sea of faces, feeling the weight of 12,000 livelihoods resting on her shoulders. Then she began to speak. My name is Emma Hartwell, and 3 weeks ago, my mother Catherine died. Most of you never knew her. She spent the last 32 years of her life deliberately staying out of the public eye, working behind the scenes, living small so I could grow up understanding that worth isn't measured in wealth. Emma paused, letting that sink in, and she saw understanding begin to ripple through the crowd. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment, raised by a single mother who clipped coupons and worked from home, and taught me that character matters more than status. I became a middle school art teacher. I married a man who worked for this company as a market research analyst. I got pregnant with twins. And 3 weeks ago, I buried my mother thinking I was alone in the world. Her voice cracked slightly on that last part, but she pushed through. Yesterday, I discovered that my mother was the founder and owner of this company. I discovered that I'd inherited a $1 trillion corporation. And I discovered that my husband, David Hartwell, who's sitting in the 3rd row right now, had served me divorce papers at my baby shower the day before, specifically because he thought I was nobody worth staying with. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Emma could see David sinking lower in his seat, could see Brianna's face turning red, could see the entire Hartwell family looking like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Here's what you all need to understand, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. My mother left me more than money. She left me a choice about what kind of person I want to be when I have unlimited power. She left me a test of character, and you're all watching me take it right now. Emma gripped the podium, feeling her baby shift inside her, and she made her decision. I could fire the Hartwell family. I could destroy their careers, bankrupt them, make them feel as powerless as they tried to make me feel. That would be revenge, and it would be easy, and it would probably feel really good for about 5 minutes. She paused, letting the tension build. But my mother didn't raise me to be someone who kicks people when they're down. She raised me to be someone who understands that true power is measured by restraint, that grace is stronger than revenge, and that the best way to prove you're better than someone is to actually be better than them. Emma looked directly at David for the first time, and she saw shame and regret and horror competing for dominance on his face. So here's what's going to happen. Gregory, Patricia, and Colin Hartwell will keep their jobs for now. They'll be placed under performance review, and they'll have to earn their positions through actual merit instead of assumed security. David Hartwell is fired, effective immediately, because I will not employ someone who lacks the basic character to stand by his pregnant wife during the hardest time of her life. David shot to his feet, his face red with fury. You can't do this. You can't punish me for leaving you. I'm not punishing you for leaving, Emma said calmly. I'm firing you for performance issues that my mother documented extensively over the years, specifically a pattern of taking credit for other people's work, consistently missing deadlines, and treating subordinates with disrespect. Your employment file is a disaster, David. The only reason you kept your job this long is because my mother didn't want to interfere in my marriage. But I'm not married to you anymore. So now there are consequences. She turned back to the crowd at large, addressing all 12,000 employees with the authority of someone who'd just discovered exactly how strong she could be. This company is going to change under my leadership. We're going to prioritize character over credentials, kindness over ruthlessness, and the understanding that every person in this organization matters. My mother built this company on the principle that doing well and doing good aren't mutually exclusive. I intend to honor that legacy. Emma paused, her hand going to her mother's pearls at her throat. To those of you who've been waiting for promotions, who've been passed over despite your talent, who've been told you're not quite good enough, that changes now. Send me your stories. Tell me what you can do. Show me who you are beyond your job title, because I'm about to reshape this entire company based on merit and character instead of politics and family connections. The applause that followed was thunderous, genuine, full of hope and surprise and the electric energy of people realizing their world had just expanded in unexpected ways. Emma left the stage feeling lighter than she had in weeks, feeling like she'd passed her mother's test with honor if not perfection. She'd chosen grace over revenge, but she'd also chosen accountability, and that balance felt right in a way that pure vengeance never could have. As she walked through the hallway toward the exit, Brianna appeared in front of her, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't fire David," Brianna begged. "Please, he needs this job. We need this job. I'm sorry for everything I said, for everything I did. Please." Emma looked at the woman who'd mocked her at her baby shower, who'd whispered cruel things and worn smug smiles, and treated Emma's pain as entertainment. And she felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no desire for vengeance. Just a profound disinterest in continuing any kind of relationship, even an antagonistic one. "I already fired him," Emma said simply, "but here's what I'll do. I'll write him a reference letter that accurately describes his skills, and I'll give him 6 months of severance pay so you both have time to figure out your next steps." That's more generous than he was to me when he served me divorce papers at my baby shower. "But," Brianna started. "This conversation is over," Emma interrupted, her voice kind but firm. "I hope you both find happiness. And I mean that sincerely, but you're going to find it somewhere other than in my company and in my life." She walked past Brianna without looking back, walked out into the afternoon sunshine, and called Lauren to tell her everything. 3 months later, Emma gave birth to 2 healthy girls. She named them Catherine and Grace, one for her mother, one for the qualities she'd chosen to embody in her darkest moment. 6 months after that, David and Brianna's relationship imploded under the stress of unemployment and poverty, and the realization that they'd built their connection on the foundation of someone else's destruction. Emma heard about it through the grapevine and felt only a distant sadness for lives wasted on jealousy and shallow ambition. A year after inheriting Hartwell Global Industries, Emma transformed the company into one of the world's most admired corporations, not just for its profits, but for its commitment to employee welfare, ethical practices, and the revolutionary idea that businesses could measure success in human flourishing instead of just financial returns. And sometimes, late at night when her daughters were sleeping, Emma would sit with her mother's pearls in her hands and think about the gift Catherine had given her. The gift of growing up ordinary so she could become extraordinary. The gift of learning character before inheriting power. The gift of understanding that true strength is measured not by what you can destroy, but by what you choose to build. David's family remained employed at Hartwell Global Industries, but they never rose above their current positions. They'd learned a hard lesson about humility and consequence, and Emma checked in on their performance reviews occasionally, not out of vindictiveness, but out of genuine commitment to fair leadership. The story of Emma's inheritance and her choices became something of a legend in business circles, a modern parable about grace and power, and the choices we make when we finally have the ability to hurt the people who've hurt us. But Emma herself rarely thought about revenge or vindication anymore. She was too busy raising her daughters with the same lessons her mother had taught her, that kindness is strength, that character is currency, and that the size of your heart matters infinitely more than the size of your bank account. And every time she looked at Catherine and Grace, named for legacy and choice, for past and future, for who she came from, and who she decided to be, Emma understood that her mother's greatest gift hadn't been the $1 trillion. It had been the courage to use that wealth with wisdom instead of ego, the strength to choose grace over revenge, and the profound understanding that power's only purpose is revealing whether we're worthy of wielding it. That was the lesson that mattered. That was the inheritance that would last forever. And that was the story Emma would tell her daughters when they were old enough to understand. Not about the money they'd inherited, but about the choices their mother made when the world gave her every reason to be cruel, and she chose to be kind instead.